Okay, so you're fascinated by how societies work, right? Like how people behave in groups and all that. I mean, who isn't these days? But you're ready to take that fascination a step further beyond just observing and actually become a sociologist. Well, you've come to the right place because we've got a stack of RoleCatcher resources right here ready to help you absolutely ace that interview.
It's definitely one thing to be passionate about sociology. We get that. But conveying that effectively in an interview, that's key. So we're going to dive deep into some common interview questions today. And I'm not just talking about what they're asking, but what those interviewers are really looking for between the lines and how you can craft answers that'll make you stand out.
Music to my ears. All right, so let's unpack this. First up in the RoleCatcher interview guide, we've got the question, what led you to pursue a career in sociology? Now, on the surface, this seems pretty straightforward, but I have a feeling this one might trip some people up.
Oh, you'd be surprised. This is where passion meets like really good preparation. Think way back, okay, to what first sparked your interest in sociology. Was it a book you read? A class that blew your mind? Maybe even just a life experience. Whatever it is, that's your origin story. And weaving that into your answer can make you super memorable. And don't forget, sociology, it's a broad field, right? The RoleCatcher Career Overview, it does a great job of highlighting just how much it touches on like legal systems, economics, cultural studies. It's all about those connections, seeing that bigger picture.
That is so true. I can already see how someone might get lost in trying to perfectly define sociology, textbook style, instead of just talking about what excites them about it specifically. Okay, I'm taking notes here. This is gold. Now, what about research? I mean, that's got to be a big one for aspiring sociologists.
Absolutely. Question number 2 in the guide asks, and listen to this wording, what is your experience conducting research in sociology? Did you catch that emphasis on your research? Because even if you haven't had a formal research position yet, you can still showcase your analytical skills. Think about it, like, have you ever had to gather information, analyze it, and then draw conclusions? Even if it was for a school project, a personal thing, it all counts.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of how RoleCatcher's AI works its magic. It digs deep into job descriptions. So let's say a description really emphasizes quantitative analysis. RoleCatcher might suggest you highlight projects involving statistics, even if they weren't purely sociological research. That's pretty smart,
Yeah.
right?
It really is.
Yeah.
The AI is all about making sure you're speaking the specific language each employer is looking for. Now, circling back to research for a sec, the Sociologist Career Guide, it really emphasizes how important reading comprehension and active listening are in this field, rating them highly, even above some technical skills sometimes, which makes sense, right? It's not always just about crunching numbers. It's about truly understanding what you're researching.
So how would you suggest someone with, say, limited formal research experience tackles that question? Should they try to, like, embellish their experience to sound more, I don't know, seasoned?
Oh, gosh, no. Definitely not. Honesty, always key. Instead of trying to sound like someone you're not, focus on what you can offer, on showcasing your potential. One great way to do this is using the STAR method. That's situation, task, action, result to structure your answer. So let's say you wrote a paper on, I don't know, social media trends. That could be a gold mine, seriously. You describe the rise of a specific platform, that's your situation, then your analysis of its impact on, let's say, a certain demographic, that's your task, then how you collected and analyzed data like user engagement metrics, that's your action, and finally your conclusions about the platform's influence, your result.
Okay, I'm starting to get how even something seemingly unrelated to, like a formal research setting, can be reframed to show off those research skills. That's a really helpful way to look at it.
Exactly. It's all about making those connections for the interviewers, right? Like, let's say a job description really emphasizes the importance of understanding youth culture. Suddenly, that social media analysis you did, it becomes super relevant, and RoleCatcher's AI will pick up on that and point it out to you.
It's like having a personalized interview coach in
Hmm.
your back pocket. Okay, so we've covered passion, we've talked about research, but the world of sociology, it's always evolving, right? So how do you show interviewers that you're keeping up, especially if you're, say, fresh out of school?
And that, my friend, is where question number 3 comes in. How do you stay up to date with current developments in sociology? Now, before you launch into this whole laundry list of every sociology book you've ever even skimmed.
Because let's be real, ain't nobody got time for that.
Exactly. When it comes to staying current, quality over quantity, always. The Sociologist Career Guide stresses the importance of joining professional associations. You can find a bunch listed in the external resources section, but don't just name drop organizations, Instead, talk about a recent article from their journal that really resonated with you or a specific project one of them is involved in that sparked your interest.
So it's about showing that genuine engagement, that you're actively seeking out information, not just that you know how to Google Sociology Association, right?
100%. You want to show that you're an active learner with genuine curiosity. That's what's going to stand out. Speaking of which, the career guide also mentions following sociologists on social media, and honestly, it's a great tip. Think about it. If you can casually mention a debate sparked by a sociologist you follow online, it shows you're plugged into the field's conversations in real time.
Okay, now that is what I call staying current.
Mm.
I'm really liking this approach a lot. It's about showcasing what you know without sounding like you're just reciting from a textbook.
Exactly. Enthusiasm, it's contagious. When you're genuinely interested in what you're talking about, it really shows. So, what's next on our list? And this is where we really start digging into the nitty-gritty of, showing them you can not only talk about sociology, but actually apply it in real-world situations. Because interviewers, they want to know that you can walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Right, so they'll want to know how you'd navigate those tricky situations you often encounter in sociological research, right?
Yeah.
How to approach research with diverse populations, because that just seems like a potential minefield if you're not super careful and aware.
It absolutely can be, and that's exactly why interviewers are going to ask about it. So, question number 4 in the RoleCatcher guide, it digs into this whole thing of how do you approach conducting research with diverse populations. And listen, it's not enough to just say, oh yeah, I value diversity. You got to actually demonstrate that cultural competence, that sensitivity.
Okay, so how do you suggest someone conveys that, beyond just stating the obvious, like, oh, everyone's different?
Okay, well, think about the different stages of a research project, right? Let's say you're researching access to healthcare. How would you frame your questions to be inclusive to all the different voices and experiences? Who are you recruiting for your study? How could you adjust your methods to make sure you're actually getting accurate data from all these different groups of people? Those are the kinds of things that interviewers really want to hear you thinking about.
So it's about showing that you understand that. Like a one-size-fits-all approach to research, it just doesn't cut it in a world as diverse as ours, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you're specifically trying to understand those very differences between people and groups.
Exactly. And you know what? This is another area where RoleCatcher's AI can really come in handy. Let's say you're looking at a job description that really emphasizes community engagement. The AI might pick up on that and suggest that you highlight experiences where you've had to adapt your communication style to connect with diverse groups, or maybe times where you successfully navigated cultural misunderstandings with sensitivity and respect. It's about showing them that you can translate your awareness into action.
Right, because it's one thing to say diversity is important, and is a whole other thing to actually show that you know how to put those values into practice in your work. Okay, so we've talked about cultural competence. What about the actual data analysis part of sociology? Because sociologists, they work with a ton of data, and it's not always simple stuff.
No kidding. Question number 5 dives right into that. How do you approach analyzing complex data sets? And again, don't just rattle off a list of software you're good at. Instead of just saying, oh yeah, I know SPSS, talk about a time where you use that tool to actually unpack a real-world problem.
Okay, so less I'm good at SPSS. More like I used SPSS to analyze, say, survey data on income inequality. And that revealed a significant disparity between, bring it to life.
Exactly. Bring that data to life, connect it to something real, something tangible, and then show them how you extracted those meaningful insights. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about tailoring your answers based on each specific job description, right? This is where RoleCatcher's AI can really shine. It analyzes those descriptions, picks out those keywords, and then it can actually suggest you highlight your experience with, say, specific statistical methods or even data visualization techniques that are super relevant to that specific role.
Seriously, it's like having a secret weapon for interview prep. Okay, so you've totally wowed them with your data analysis skills, but now they want to know if you can handle taking charge. Can you lead a project? And question 6 asks exactly that. Can you describe a research project that you designed and led? Which honestly might sound kind of intimidating, especially for someone who's just starting out in their career.
It doesn't have to be, though. Remember, leadership, it comes in many forms. Think about it. Have you ever organized a study group? Maybe you conducted a smaller research project for a class, even spearheaded a volunteer project, something like that. Those all count.
So it's more about showcasing your initiative, showing that you're capable of ownership, even if it wasn't like a formal leadership title or anything.
You got it. That's exactly it. And again, the STAR method is your best friend here. Use it to break down that project. What was the situation, the task, the action you took, and the result you achieved? And highlight your specific contributions and what skills you picked up along the way, especially the ones that are relevant to that job description. Did you have to delegate tasks, manage a timeline and keep everyone on track, resolve conflicts? These are all super valuable leadership skills.
This is really making me think about how so much of interviewing for any job is about connecting those dots for the interviewers, because they're not mind readers.
They're not, which is why you need to be the one drawing those clear lines between your experiences, your skills, and what they're looking for in a candidate.
Okay, so we've covered diversity, data analysis, leadership. What about those trickier, more conceptual questions that sociologists often deal with? I'm thinking about, like, intersectionality. It's such a crucial concept, but it can be tough to explain concisely, let alone connect to your own work experience.
Oh, absolutely. Intersectionality, it's complex, no doubt about it. And you're right, the RoleCatcher Guide, it doesn't have a specific question on that, but it's absolutely essential knowledge for any aspiring sociologist. Remember, it's about understanding how all those different social identities like race, gender, class, sexual orientation, you name it, they don't exist in a vacuum. They intersect and interact to shape everyone's individual and collective experiences. So be ready to define it in your own words in a way that feels natural to you, and then provide a relevant example of how you could apply that intersectional lens in your work.
So going back to our healthcare access example, you could talk about how an intersectional approach might reveal that, say, women of color might face very different barriers to healthcare than, let's say, white women or men of color, right?
Exactly. You've got it. It's about demonstrating that deep understanding of how inequality functions and how those intersecting identities can result in very different forms of either disadvantage or privilege. And even if the interviewer doesn't specifically come out and say intersectionality, finding ways to naturally weave it into your answers shows them that you're really thinking about the bigger picture of social dynamics.
Okay, I'm really seeing the value of not just like memorizing definitions or pre-rehearsed answers, but really truly understanding the heart of these sociological concepts and how to apply them to real-world scenarios.
Yes,
Really?
1,000 times, yes, because that's how you show them that you can think critically and apply that theoretical knowledge to those practical, on-the-ground situations. Now, let's shift gears for a sec and talk about another super crucial aspect of being a sociologist: communication.
Oh, right. Because it's one thing to do all this amazing research, but it's a whole other ball game to actually communicate those findings effectively, especially to audiences outside of academia who might not be as familiar with all the lingo and stuff, right?
You hit the nail on the head, and that's precisely what question number 7 explores. How do you approach communicating research findings to non-academic audiences?
Okay, I'm intrigued. How do you suggest tackling this one?
Start by thinking about your own experiences, explaining those big, complex topics to people in your life, friends, family, maybe even that random person at a party who asks, "So what is it you're studying again?" What strategies do you use to make those ideas click for them, to make them engaging?
Okay, so using those relatable examples, I like it.
Yeah.
But how do you translate that to like a more formal professional setting?
Well, think about how you can tailor your language to your audience. Can you use visuals? Find creative ways to connect your research to people's everyday experiences. Let's say you're presenting your research on, I don't know, how social media impacts mental health, right?
Yeah.
Instead of bombarding them with statistics and jargon, you could start with a relatable story, maybe an anecdote about a friend who's constantly on Instagram comparing themselves to others, and then you can weave your research findings in, showing how your study sheds light on that exact phenomenon.
So it's about meeting your audience where they're at, speaking their language, and drawing those clear connections between your research and their own lived experiences.
Exactly. And it also demonstrates that you're capable of bridging that gap between academia and the real world, which honestly is a valuable skill in any field, but especially in sociology, where your work often has those very direct implications for things like social policy and real change.
This reminds me of what we were talking about earlier, about how important it is to tailor your answers to each specific job description. So if a position involves a lot of community outreach or public speaking, highlighting your communication skills in this way becomes even more crucial, right?
Absolutely. And that's where, once again, RoleCatcher's AI can be a lifesaver. It can really help you pick out those keywords and tailor your answers accordingly. Remember, you're presenting yourself as the ideal candidate for that specific role. That's the goal.
Okay, I'm really starting to see how all of this ties together now. We've covered so much ground here, navigating diversity, communicating complex research. It's amazing. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of what it really takes to prepare for a sociology job interview, but in a good way, you know? It's so clear that it's not just about knowing the right answers. It's about demonstrating that passion, those critical thinking skills, and that ability to use your knowledge to make sense of the world around us.
You said it. It's about showing them who you are as a sociologist, not just what you know.
I love that. Okay, now this next question, it's a big one. Ethics. Because it's one thing to be passionate about your research, but it's another thing entirely to make sure that your work is being conducted ethically and responsibly.
Absolutely. Ethical considerations are like the foundation of good sociological work. The interviewer is going to want to know that you're not just thinking about the research itself, but also about the potential impact it could have, and that you're committed to those high ethical standards.
So for that question, how do you approach ethical considerations in your research? How do you suggest someone answers that in a way that doesn't sound vague or like too general?
It's definitely a tricky one. My advice is to ground your answer in some real-world examples from your own experiences. Think about a time when you were faced with an ethical dilemma, even if it was something in a classroom setting. How did you handle that situation? What were the key ethical principles that were at play?
Okay, so let's say I'm conducting a study on, I don't know, student experiences with online learning during a pandemic, something like that. I could talk about how I made sure to get informed consent from all of my participants, that I protected their anonymity, and that it was super clear that they could back out of the study at any time, no questions asked.
Exactly. And you could even take it a step further and talk about how you navigated those potential power imbalances between you as the researcher and the students as participants. Did you do anything to try to mitigate those power dynamics and ensure that your participants felt comfortable being open and honest with you, sharing their experiences?
Right, because even those seemingly low-stakes research projects, they can still bring up those ethical questions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about showing that you're thinking about those nuances and that you're ready to deal with them thoughtfully and responsibly.
You got it. And honestly, it's okay to admit that you don't have all the answers. Ethics is an ongoing conversation in the field of sociology, so showing that willingness to learn and grow in that area, that's just as important as having all the so-called right answers.
I love that. Okay, so we've tackled ethical considerations. What's next on our sociologist interview prep list?
You know, it's funny, we always talk about job interviews like we're the ones on trial, right? Like we have to prove we're good enough. But it's a two-way street. You're interviewing them too.
Okay, yes. Love that energy.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in impressing them that we forget we get to be picky too. So how do you actually like flip the script and interview them, but without seeming, difficult or anything?
Ask good questions. Questions that show you're really thinking about the organization, the role, all of it. Not just what's the culture like, but something more like, I'm a big believer in work-life balance. How does that play out here day to day?
Ooh, such a good example. It's like you're not just going through the motions, you're really trying to see if this place is a good fit for you.
Exactly. And it subtly shows them what you value, which is just as important as your skills sometimes. Don't be afraid to ask about like professional development, especially if you're early in your career. Something like, I'm always looking to learn. What kind of mentorship or training do you offer?
Love that. It shows you're thinking long term, like I'm not just here for a job, I'm here to build a career.
Exactly. And honestly, don't be afraid to ask about the tough stuff, like what are the biggest challenges someone in this role might face? How does the organization support them through that?
So smart.
Yeah.
Shows you're realistic, not afraid of hard work, and you get to see how they handle problems.
Exactly. And pay attention to their vibes too, not just what they say. Are they engaged, enthusiastic? Do they seem like they actually care about you as a candidate?
It's a two-way street, right? We got to remind ourselves of that.
For sure. Trust your gut. If something feels off, the answers aren't vibing with your values. Walk away.
Such a good point. It's easy to get blinded by a potential job offer, but it's got to be the right fit for you.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up, can I circle back to RoleCatcher's AI real quick? Not just for interview prep, but like evaluating the actual job opportunities.
Oh, right. Almost forgot about that. Tell me more.
So the AI, it can analyze those job descriptions, right? And sometimes it picks up on things you might miss. Let's say there's a lot of talk about working independently, being a self-starter, but nothing about teamwork.
Ooh, yeah, I can see that being a red flag, depending.
Right. Could mean it's a very individualistic culture, maybe not the best if you thrive on collaboration.
Or if they're all about being highly adaptable and comfortable with ambiguity.
Could mean things are constantly changing, the role isn't super defined, which some people love that, others recipe for burnout. So be aware, ask those questions in the interview to make sure it aligns with you.
This is gold. I feel so much more equipped to tackle these interviews, strategically and, powerfully. Any last wisdom bombs for our listeners before we wrap things up?
Landing that dream sociology job, it's a journey, not just a finish line, you know? Explore those paths, make connections, and never lose that passion for figuring out how the world works.
Beautifully said. So, to all our listeners out there, embrace the challenges, celebrate the successes, and never stop diving deep into the fascinating world of sociology.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into landing that dream sociologist job. You've been listening to The Deep Dive, and we'll be back next week with another fascinating topic. Until then, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.